For most of us, we prefer a society that's equitable and inclusive of many groups, including us and the groups that we belong to. We might call this a kind of multicultural nationalism. And by contrast, we have seen a fair amount of discussion over white Christian nationalism, which favors a kind of singular racial and religious domination. We have evidence from various studies that white Christian nationalism played a significant role in the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. And as you can see in this image, at least one of the protesters there was waving the Christian flag in the lower left corner. But what shocked me, and perhaps some of you who didn't see this on your newsfeed, was the presence of Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, and Indian flags also at the protest. This is not a fabricated set of images from AI. In an event touted as espousing white supremacy, there were Asian Americans present. So what is going on? The question of whether white Christian nationalism matters to Asian Americans drives the next set of findings. This too, by the way, is a ChatGPT image when I gave it the keywords white Christian nationalism, Asian Americans. I imagine this would be an interesting conversation in itself over how ChatGPT understands these words. Now, turning once more to the CMPS 2020, I asked a series of questions, as you can see here. These questions pick up on a conceptualization of white nationalism and Christian nationalism, and combined together we get white Christian nationalism. From the Asian American sample of respondents, the WCN scale runs from about 1 to 25 points, higher value meaning greater agreement with the statements affirming white Christian nationalism. First, notice that the mean of WCN for Asian Americans is only about 10.2, which is below the midpoint of the scale. This suggests that for Asian Americans there is less agreement with WCN, but it also indicates that it's not absolutely rejected by the majority of respondents either. When I run this same scale for all racial groups in the CMPS, we see that Asian Americans score slightly lower than most other groups. White respondents showed the highest levels of agreement with both white nationalism and Christian nationalism. Turning back to the Asian American sample, I used the same religious affiliations we saw before, and we can see that conservative Protestants are the closest to the midpoint of the WCN scale, showing that they are more likely to support WCN over any other religious and non-religious group in Asian America. But we should not misunderstand this. Asian American conservative Protestants are at best moderately supportive of white Christian nationalism. They are not ardent supporters nor ardent rejectors of this ideology in the way that the items read on the scale. Other Christians and Catholics have lower means for WCN, and the non-Christian groupings and non-religious have slightly lower means as well. Again, their scores are surprisingly higher than what I would have guessed. I had expected mean scores closer to like a 4, for example, as opposed to an 8.5. So even though non-Christian Asian Americans have moderate endorsement of this ideology. Now, what's the consequence of this ideology? When we look at vote choice, we see that Asian Americans who preferred Trump had a significantly higher WCN score on average compared to those who supported Biden. And when we disaggregate the Asian Americans by the religious affiliations, we see the same pattern across the board. Trump voters for every religious group had sizable higher means of WCN compared to Biden voters. The most dramatic contrast here is among atheists. But the smallest gap between Biden and Trump voters on this scale is not with any of the Christian groups, it's with Hindu Asian Americans. So, in the second set of takeaways, white Christian nationalism is supported in greater numbers than what we would have probably imagined. Most surveys lack sufficient Asian American group samples to make this kind of a distinction. And in addition, endorsement of this ideology is not limited to conservative Protestant Christians, nor to Christians on the whole. And lastly, one of the consequences of agreement with this ideology was greater preference for Trump in the 2020 election. So, as a bonus, I wanted to show you how important WCN is relative to interpretations of the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. The CMPS asked all respondents for their view on that incident by asking them to select the statement closest to their personal view. They read as follows: Trump encouraged or incited the attack. He shares blame for what happened. Second, rioters were inspired by Trump, but he should not be blamed for encouraging them. Third, Trump had no connection to the rioters. He should not be blamed at all. And this is what we see when we again check for the mean value of WCN relative to each response category disaggregated by religious affiliation. Asian American conservative Protestants stand out for their higher WCN means, even for those who believe Trump shares in the blame for the attack. So there is only about a 2 percentage point gap between those who blame Trump and those who exonerate him among conservative Protestants. But notice the impact WCN has among Asian American Muslims, atheists, and agnostics. These three groups have the widest gap in WCN means between those who blame Trump and those who excuse him. So what this suggests as a final takeaway, WCN is not a proxy for conservative Protestantism. It's an ideology that is widespread among many major religious groups and the non-religious as well. Among certain affiliations and non-affiliations, it picks up on important differences in the perceptions of the January 6th riot, as well as presidential candidate preference. Put together, religious affiliation and religion as signaled in this ideology suggests that religion as a whole is an important vector that can have predictive power in how Asian Americans think about what policies are important and who they trust to lead the country. We should encourage data collection on these facets going forward as they reveal important ideological and cultural diversity within Asian America that has important political correlations and consequences.